Okay, so what if I told you there's a story in the Bible about a 140-year-old man who fathered 6 sons? And not just any sons, these guys went on to found 6 nations. And it's a story that honestly almost nobody talks about. Sounds completely impossible, right? Well, it happened. It's right there, kind of hidden in the pages of Genesis. So today, let's dive into this forgotten marriage that seems to defy every single law of nature. All right, let's just start with the main thing here, the part that feels, well, almost impossible to believe. And that's Abraham's age. I mean, we're not just talking about an old man. This was someone ancient, someone whose story pretty much everyone, probably even himself, thought was completely over. I mean, just pause and really think about that for a second. Could a guy who had already lived this epic, legendary life really start a whole new family, a whole new legacy? When you look at it through our modern lens, the answer seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Yeah, it sounds completely absurd. Biologically, well, it's just not supposed to happen. From a medical standpoint, it's almost laughable. His body should have been failing, you know? His strength should have been long gone. And that's exactly where this story just shatters everything we think we know about our own limitations. Just look at that number, 140. That's not just a number on a page, is it? It's the anchor for the entire tension of this story. Remember, God had already performed a massive miracle for Abraham to have Isaac at age 100. Now, 40 years later, this was asking for a whole other level of belief, a whole new dimension of faith. So to really get just how out of the blue this new chapter was, you've got to understand the emotional setting. You have to put yourself there. Everyone, and I mean everyone, probably including Abraham himself, figured his story was winding down. The final chapter was being written. That season of his life, the one for building a family, was over. So let's just trace the timeline real quick. At 100 years old, the miracle son, Isaac, is born. A lifetime of promise fulfilled, right there. But then, at age 137, Sarah, the love of his life, she dies. And for 3 years, there's just silence, grief. And then, at 140, bam, a completely new, totally unexpected chapter begins. I mean, try to imagine the scene. The whole household is in mourning. Abraham has just buried his wife of over a century. Isaac, the heir, is grown and starting his own life, securing the future. The story is, it's winding down. In that moment, Abraham isn't the great patriarch. He's just a man who's lost the love of his life, seemingly at the very end of his journey. But then, just when everybody thought the credits were about to roll, a new character walks onto the stage, seemingly from absolutely nowhere. And she changes everything. The Bible just states it with this stunning simplicity. One line, Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah. That's it. But those few words, they ignite a whole new dimension of God's plan. Can you even imagine the shockwaves that went through that household? A wedding at 140? Now, the crazy thing is, we know almost nothing about Keturah's backstory. She's a mystery, but her name tells us a lot. Keturah means incense. And in the Bible, incense isn't just some nice air freshener. It's a sacred offering. It's something that rises to God. Her very name suggests she was part of a much bigger divine purpose. And, that brings the question right back to us, doesn't it? Because Abraham had to say yes. Keturah had to say yes. They both had to step into a purpose that, let's be honest, looked absolutely foolish to everyone on the outside. So here's the question. Would you have that kind of courage to believe God for something new when the whole world is telling you you're done? And what happened next? Well, it proved that their yes was absolutely not in vain. The outcome of this, let's call it improbable marriage, it wasn't just about companionship. No, it was about multiplication on a scale that I don't think anyone could have possibly predicted. Think about this. The very same God who had renewed Abraham's body at 100 years old was now doing it again, well past 140. Keturah conceived, not once but 6 times. 6 sons were born. Each one was a living, breathing miracle of God's faithfulness. And here are their names: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, these aren't just names on some dusty old list. No, these are the fathers of 6 tribes, 6 nations that would spread out across the ancient world and completely change the course of history. And this was the fulfillment of a promise God had made decades earlier.
See, God didn't promise Abraham he'd be the father of a nation. The promise was for many nations. Isaac was one, Ishmael was another. But these 6 sons, they were the key to unlocking a whole dimension of that promise that most people just completely miss.
So the big question is, what happened to these 6 sons? Did they just stick around? Nope. They didn't just stay in Canaan. Abraham, being guided by God, gave them a very specific mission, a very specific direction to go. Now, when you read that he sent them away, it can kind of sound like a rejection, right? But it wasn't. It was divine organization. He gave them substantial gifts. We're not talking about a small inheritance here. He gave them the resources they needed to succeed. See, their purpose was just different from Isaac's, who was carrying the main messianic line. Their mission? To go east, establish nations, and spread the legacy of Abraham all across the world. Okay, and this is where it gets really cool. This is where these supposedly forgotten sons connect directly to some of the most famous stories in the entire Bible. Ready? Look at Midian. His descendants, the Midianites, they're the ones who sheltered Moses when he fled Egypt. Moses' wise father-in-law, Jethro, was a direct descendant of Keturah. Or how about Yokshan? He fathered Sheba and Dedan, powerful tribes who controlled the super lucrative incense trade routes. And yep, you guessed it, it was their queen, the Queen of Sheba, who traveled all that way to test Solomon's wisdom. See, this isn't just trivia, it's a hidden legacy woven right into the main story. So let's be clear, these weren't just some minor, insignificant tribes. These were major players. They dominated trade routes, they gave counsel to one of Israel's greatest leaders, they engaged with its wisest king. Keturah's children weren't footnotes in the story. They were part of the very fabric of biblical history. Okay, so this is a really fascinating piece of hidden history, for sure. But what does it actually mean for us, right here, today? Why does a story of a 140-year-old man and his mysterious wife even matter now? Well, I think it really boils down to 3 huge lessons. Number 1, it is never, ever too late for a brand new beginning. Number 2, God's promises are always bigger and way more layered than we can possibly imagine at first. And number 3, faithfulness, even when it feels small and totally unnoticed, like Keturah's did, can have a massive generational impact. And this really just captures the whole heart of the story. We look at age, we look at our circumstances, our past pain, and we say, I'm too old, or that door's closed. We impose these limits on ourselves. But this story just thunders across the centuries with a different message. With God, a whole new season of fruitfulness can begin at the exact moment we think our story is over. So that leaves us with one final thought, one final question for you. Abraham and Keturah, they said yes to a chapter that looked completely impossible to everyone around them. So the question is, what impossible chapter is just waiting for your yes? What new beginning could be born in your life if you just dared to believe, like they did, that your story isn't over yet?